right. Happy Friday, everyone. We are back with another Learning Tech Talks where we are continuing to explore the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff and getting your questions answered and hopefully exposing you to new technologies and capabilities out there that you did not know before. So today I am joined by Juan Lagrange. I think I said that right, right? All right, pretty
Well
close.
done.
Thank you. Thank you. And he is from Sunlight, and we're going to be talking about. I don't really know the best way to describe it, but I think people are going to be really interested in it because I was telling Juan before we went live here that I've had a number of conversations with people who are trying to solve the challenge that you've set out to solve for them. So I'm going to actually save it to say, we'll see how you describe it for people. But anyway, it's going to be a great conversation on basically empowering your workforce to be able to choose your own development in some regards, and that can be an uncomfortable territory for some people. So I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. We're going to have a fun one for sure. But before we get into it, we got to do what we always do. We got to do what we always do, which is let's do some icebreaker stuff so people get to know who you are a little bit, and we'll engage them in conversation as well. So Juan and everybody watching, you can comment, but Juan, where are you in the world today?
So thanks for having me, Chris. And I'm in London at this time.
Okay. Are you
Sunny
at
London.
home or are you in the office?
I'm at my home office, I guess.
Okay, got it, got it. Well, I saw the door open, so I'm like, well, you know,
Yeah.
I can never tell if somebody's bumping into your room or what.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And
Yeah.
it's
I have
sunny.
my girlfriend's actually like literally hiding as he's going by. So he didn't want to appear
That is the best. I love the
in the
fact that you
podcast.
did that. Oh, that is you're in so much trouble. You're in
I
so
am,
much
I am.
trouble.
I am. This is gonna be fun.
That is awesome. Okay, all right. Well, if my kids sneak in or anything like that, I'll do the same to them. I'll embarrass them. Okay, so you're in sunny London. Is it legitimately sunny right now?
For London standards, it is very sunny.
Okay, for
So
London standards.
I guess
I
for normal
sensed a
standards,
bit of
it's cloudy.
sarcasm.
It is. It
Okay.
is. Yeah.
All right.
It's a
Yeah.
bit cloudy.
Well, all right. Well, I'm in Waukesha. I'm actually still just laughing because I saw the door open. The fact I didn't. Okay. Anyway, so I'm in Waukesha where I always am. It's been warm, but it's cooling down, and today's kind of cloudy, so kind of a bummer. But all right, let's switch gears over to our icebreaker question, which I'm actually really curious to see where you go with this one because you were noodling on your answer to this. So everybody who's watching, you can play along. I have the advantage that I know the questions before we come in most of the time. So I had my answer prepped, but I want to see where you go with this one. And everybody else, I'm curious where you are. But what was the first thing you remember buying with your own money? So let's take a trip down memory lane and see where you landed in terms of what'd you buy with your own money, the first thing.
So I actually bought a Super Nintendo game with my allowance,
Okay.
and it was Mario Kart. Uh,
Mario Kart.
so this was 1992 or three or something,
Okay.
and I was in fourth grade, I believe. So yeah, I saved up and bought Mario Kart for Super Nintendo. That was it. I have a younger brother, and we still play Mario Kart to this day. So not that version, but
Okay.
yeah,
All right. You know what's funny is Super Mario Kart on Super Nintendo was a fantastic game, especially for the time. It was like one of the first multiplayer experiences. So that was a
it
good
was.
choice. That was a good choice. That brings back. So, okay, if you still play Mario Kart though, because I still play Mario Kart with my kids. I love Mario Kart. Do you play the new one? Do you have like the AR version one where people are zooming around, or is it just still, you go in retro with it?
We play the Switch version. I
The
haven't
Switch.
I have actually played the VR version, but it seems like a lot of fun. Like I know I would have had a lot of fun with that if I had it when I was a kid.
I know, I know. My kids keep asking about it, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that we need more things zooming around the house. If you can
Hmm.
use it on your device. Okay, so you got Mario Kart 8. All right, I got it. Okay, so for mine goes back. Man, no. Now you're making me think about Nintendo games. They were so expensive back then. They were
They
so
were.
expensive. So I was in sixth grade, I think, And I moved to this tiny town in rural Minnesota, and everybody played hockey. And I did not have a hockey stick. I had skates, but I didn't have a hockey stick. And I remember that it was a tiny town, the local like store had hockey sticks, and it took me forever to save up for this. But I remember distinctly going in and purchasing the hockey stick. They even put it on layaway for me so that I could pay it off. But that was the first thing. Not nearly as exciting as Mario Kart, but I do distinctly remember it. All right. Well, let's shift gears. Let's shift gears over to this because we're going to be talking about. Like I said, I have a hard time figuring out what category to put Sunlight in. I still am kind of struggling with that because it's not really a marketplace, but it kind of is. Sort of, not really. And that's why I don't want to call it a marketplace. So anyway, but before we do that, tell me a little bit about what got you to the point of founding this and now leading this. Like, was that something that you always knew you wanted to do? Did it grow out of a pain point? What was that journey for you?
So a little bit about my background. I'm originally from Venezuela, and I've been very, very passionate about education in general. Like I think kind of third world country. I was fortunate to be brought in private school, and I was privileged in that sense. But education really made a significant impact in my life, and it was a big difference between being able to succeed in life versus not being able to. So. Since very young, I've been very interested in education, and actually started my first company in the education space. It was called Academia, still is called Academia, and we work with school management platforms, so K-12, not really corporate. And the whole idea was if we can get parents to know about what their kids are up to in real time, they get more involved, better grades, better education. That was the premise. And ran that company for about 4 or 5 years. That took me to then consulting in the education space, worked with a bunch of different educational providers and LMSs. And that's what got me thinking, myself and my co-founder, which is actually my brother, who's also very passionate about it. And the original
likes Mario Kart.
Oh, yeah, he's actually my always player number 2. Yeah. Yeah. Still, again, to this day, we do have tournaments. We should have actually, fun story. This like multi-year tournaments where you actually accumulated points, right? So we saw each other maybe once a week or every 10 days. We played. We had points. We had like this huge list. It was amazing. But anyway, yeah.
So he's joining you on this journey. He joined you on this journey again.
Absolutely, and it was originally his idea. The original concept came. Crypto was going crazy at the time. It was like 2015, and the thought about decentralization, and we thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if we had some form of learning currency? Like that was the original spark. Like, what if we could very transparently invest into anybody's personal or professional development? Like, what if you could get, say, I'm going to have, 10,000, $1 million, $10 million. You could say, I'm going to invest these $10 million specifically in 18 to 25-year-olds in rural Indiana, right? And that could only be spent on their personal development or their professional development. You could track their progress. You could actually see their impact. And that was the original idea behind Sunlight. And we quickly realized that, the world really wasn't ready for a cryptocurrency for education, and like the things that needed to happen for that to actually take place and materialize were still probably a decade away. But we said, well, there's something about this idea that I think we can start testing it out. And it's, well, who has a budget issue today? Who has a budget issue that needs to invest in people? And the answer was companies, right? It was yep. Both small, medium, large companies. Everyone needs to invest in their employees, and even more so as time move forward, because the amount of time that you needed to retrain, the amount of time that skills were actually useful was shorter, right? Like, there's new tooling coming around. There's better practices. There's all these things. You need to be constantly be training yourself and be improving. So we said, okay, corporates have this huge budget, and let's see what they're doing with it. Let's have and we actually started exploring and understanding, like, what's going on here, right? Because there's obviously a lot of information out there about how much companies are spending in learning and how are they spending it, and they're like, well, all right, so what's going on here? And we quickly realized that, well, this was mostly going towards these things called LMSs, which we were just found out that they existed at the time. And said, well, what do these things do? And so, well, most of them were a very highly fragmented space. There's no Facebook of LMSs, right? There's like 60 of them, and they do more or less the same thing. And I know a lot of LMS people are going to be potentially pissed that I just said that. But it was at that time, especially a repository of content. You push it down into the org, and when you saw what it was actually used for, it was compliance, right? Like
Yes.
people were not passionate, right? Its majority was about being compliant. It was, I need to do something to be compliant in my job, where it's in insurance or it's in health or it's sexual harassment, whatever it is. But there's no one that we ever talked with that, said, I just woke up 9 a.m. and I was super excited to learn about this new thing. And the first thing I did was jumped on my LMS. Right? Like that never happens, right? So it was like, okay, these people are spending all this money here, and it's being funneled into the LMS, but it's really not scratching the itch that we want to scratch. And then you have L&D teams and departments maybe trying to understand the needs of these different departments in the organization, trying to hook up workshops and get providers. Like, well, it seems like a lot of work. We had this background in learning, and we knew that the most important thing about learning anything was just curiosity. You had to be curious. Yes. You had to want to learn something, either because you were challenged at your job, because you read something that you didn't understand, you wanted to get better practices, like something was happening that you were curious.
Some sort of trigger.
It has to be a trigger. It has to be that itch that you want to be better at something. You want to understand it better. You want to, improve on yourself, and maybe it's, you want to get a promotion, whatever it is. But there is this curiosity and motivation behind it. And we're like, well, when that itch comes, what do people naturally do? What's like the first thing that they do? Like, the first thing they do is they just go on Google. Like that's what they do, right? They'll go on Google and they say, well, this is the problem that I have, and maybe check out some videos on YouTube. That video might lead you to a book might lead you to a workshop. Workshop might lead you to an online course. Like they follow all kinds of different paths to scratch that itch. Exactly. They go down this rabbit hole of, and they're constantly asking, well, is this maybe the best use of my time? Who can I ask? All of these amazing platforms have reviews, but are the reviews actually something that you can trust, right? Because you don't know, some you can, some you can't. And we said, well, you're having these L&D teams that are trying to understand what the best courses and content is for these specific use cases and employees. And the reality is you are flying 10,000 feet above the air, right? Where the person that actually has the problem really understands exactly what they need. Not only that, but they know themselves. So that means that they know that they have an hour commute, which means that they like to listen to audiobooks.
They know what's going to fit into their life.
Exactly right. They know exactly what's going to fit. So it's like, well, what if this same concept that we had of an educational currency, we applied it into companies, right? They already have a budget. They need their employees to learn. What happens if we give the employees control over this budget and we enable them to actually choose what they want to learn about, right? Like, let's try it out. And we were fortunate enough to find a company that wanted to try it out exactly like that in 2016. And company was called Lost My Name. It was about a 70-employee company in London. Okay. Today it's called Wonderbly. Amazing company. They do personalized children books. Yeah. Okay. Not advertising that, but exactly, but great company. And we saw how engagement just went through the roof, right? Because now people were in control of this spending, and they were actually starting to choose the books, the online courses, the workshops, the coaching, like whatever fit them and whatever they wanted to do. So we said, okay, this is definitely something that we want to go deeper into this rabbit hole. And that was 2016. And we've been doing it since, past 5 years.
Okay. Got it. So when you talk to people about it, because this concept, like I said, even in the beginning, I'm like, in terms of how I would categorize it, if you were to say, what is this? It can be a little bit difficult to put in a nice, clean marketing category of, well, this is this is a this. How do you describe it to people? Because again, without the story, without the explanation, I can say as a learning leader, I recognize the pain point where this is coming from, and I'm very familiar with it. In fact, it's something I've seen organizations try to tackle multiple times. But if somebody asks you, well, so what is sunlight? How do you describe it to people who may not be as familiar with the space?
Sure, and it's definitely something that we've struggled with as well. Like, what is
Yeah.
this one liner? What is the specific category?
What
And
is
it
the
seems that
tagline?
what is the tagline, right? So we've had a few through the years, and the latest one is like, well, we're learning as a benefit, right? And the reason learning as a benefit has fit is because um, it is actually something that companies are also using to attract talent. So it's starting to become part of the overall package that is being offered to employees, right? So it's like your wellness package. This is your learning package. This is your benefit, like overall. And it's a great way for companies to actually kind of put their money where their mouth is. It's like, we believe in our employees. We want to invest into their employees, and this is actually a very transparent way. Like it's not that we're going to do workshops, not that you're going to get access to this limited list of providers, but there is actually a dollar amount that is assigned to you that you own, that you can actually determine exactly what it is that you want to do and where you want to invest it. Equally, it's not part of your overall compensation, so it's tax deductible, which means it's a great benefit to have. So the wine
I like
liner
that.
is we
Learning as a
provide learning as a benefit.
I like that versus like learning as a service or think because it really and I think one of the things that sometimes when I've had these conversations before that can ruffle some feathers is that it can create a little bit of a polarizing effect where people feel like, well, but there's more that needs to be done from a learning and development standpoint within an organization. And my answer to that is you're absolutely right. Like this isn't just a, well, you just dump all of your learning onto this type of thing and then just hope that it works itself out. No, it's not that at all. But there is this, I have a visual for it, the trifecta of how we should be operating. And one of it is this employee well-being and benefit of how are you actually just making them know that their development is something the company cares about and is empowering you to do. And it's an important factor in your strategy that people need to consider. But a lot of times it is not as easily said, not as easily done as said. I think that's one of the things that I was fascinated when we first met and started talking about this was the fact that a lot of times companies have tried to tackle this and they end up buying massive packages or subscriptions to big things to try and do
Yep.
this cast the widest net and say, well, if we buy this one subscription and give it to everybody, hopefully that will work. And to your point, everybody knows what fits for them, so now you're trying to do this one size fits all approach where what you're saying is you were going to spend the money anyway, but rather than you trying to invest in something and get it right for everybody,
Yep.
make that same investment. Let us figure out the other side of it so that people can spend their dollars on the things that matter most to them for their own growth and development.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, Chris. And I think people want to do this kind of, what's the silver bullet, right? What this thing that does everything,
Right.
right? But the problem with things that do everything is that they don't do everything really, really well, right?
Correct.
So we are highly specialized in this very one thing. And then we play nicely with your LMS or with whatever provider that you have for other things that you might be doing internally. And to your point, our experience has been exactly that. Many of these large companies, what they do is, I'm going to go to this, I won't name names, but large, massive online course provider. I'm going to buy 500 licenses. And then what ends up happening is, well, they maybe use 250 of those licenses, which, great. But then you just lost half of the budget that you spend on the other 250. And then when you look at usage, it was used, those 250 for maybe one course, and maybe 20 people use it for two courses. So what would have happened if those people had ownership of that budget, right? Where could that have been used? And not only where could it have been used, but what would you have learned about these employees that you don't know today because they had ownership? And that's actually one of our key learnings and values from Sunlight. It's not only the fact that yes, you have ownership and people get suspended, but it's all these things that are completely hidden about employees, their passions, what they want to do, that you will never reveal until it is for them to actually choose what it is that they want to do, right?
Yep.
I mean, we have this amazing case. It was one of those aha moments for us, specifically with this first company called Lost My Name. They had a very senior backend developer, and this was like typical backend introverted character. You know, maybe said one sentence in the meeting, but the sentence was exactly what needed to be said. Like, you know, just very on point, but a little bit intimidating if you know the character, right? Like not very approachable. And when given ownership of his budget, he actually started taking drawing courses, like actual like illustrations and drawings, and people, they did not, like, that was kind of out of character. Like, they was a bit, you know, that wasn't something that they were expecting. And it turned out he was very interested in product. Right. So he wanted to transition to a product role. So the fact that he chose that opened up a conversation with the head of people and the which led to a conversation with the head of product. And he ended up in the product team and being a perfect bridge between product and engineering. But it was something that started because exactly.
Never would have. Well, and you know what's interesting about this point is it gets to one of the challenges I think sometimes people face in making this shift, because historically, and I think a lot of organizations still struggle with this, there's this perception of, well, you should want to develop on what we want you to develop on. That's kind of the drive, is like, well, we want you to develop on the things we think are important, and not seeing the value that you just highlighted, which is, in the same vein, we sit and have conversations how we're struggling to understand what people are really interested in, what their skills are, where do they want to go from a growth and development, so we don't lose them to other companies or things like that. And it's like, well, in order to get that, we need to actually understand what's important to them and what are the things that they're really interested in. And we can't do that if we're constantly trying to throttle or bottleneck things and say, well, we want you to develop as long as it's on the things we say are important for you to develop in. And I think those insights that you just talked about, you're not going to get them if the only opportunities people have to develop are the ones that you tell them that they can have access to.
Yeah.
But that's a mindset shift. I have to imagine when you have these conversations with people, the questions have to come up of, well, what if they don't do things? What if they end up spending the money on things that aren't directly related to their job? Or what if they end up doing things that we don't necessarily think are valuable?
Yeah, no, and these are questions we definitely get all the time. So it's interesting because, you know, from there's kind of these different scenarios of, you know, what happens if we give them the ownership, and they don't do exactly what you expected them to do, right? Well, did you learn something about these people that you didn't know before, right? Is it maybe that that's not the right role for them? Is it actually that they're not as interested in the current role and maybe can be better used elsewhere, right? Yeah. But equally, if say that you don't give them that opportunity, and then they're not being stimulated anyway, right? Because there's also a mindset of, at least within Sunlight and within most of the companies that we work with, if not all, that everything that you are investing into another human being will actually be repaid and with dividends, right? Because any role in any organization is not just about, you know, can I write better code? Can I write better product? Can I do my accounting in a more efficient way? Can I, you know, do I know my legal, whatever it is, if you're a lawyer? Like, yes, these are hard skills, but becoming a healthier person, a happier person, a more engaged person, a more curious person, like that is something that will benefit the company anyway, right? Anyway. So, but it is true that this has to be a common belief within the companies that we work with. Otherwise, it becomes a complicated relationship of again, having control where you do have accountability, which is different than control. And that's also one of the key values of Sunlight, right? You're going to have oversight of what people are doing. You're going to be able to start conversations and ask them about, hey, that's interesting, Christopher. Like, I didn't know that was something related to your job or something that you want to do. But ideally, that should be promoted for you to explore these things, because again, this will promote more engaged employees, better employees, happier employees, and ultimately better professionals for the entire organization.
Okay. Well, and I am 100% behind what you're saying here. And again, this has been a challenge that I've faced probably my whole career in this, is that can sometimes be a difficult message to explain. I would say probably in more recent years, that conversation has gotten easier as organizations are starting to see the data behind, hey, happy, engaged, healthy employees perform better. It seems like a common sense conclusion to come to, but common sense isn't always common. And I think for a while, it hasn't really been seen that way. It was more, well, we're the employer. You're here to do what we need you to do. You want to do that? You do it on your own time with your own money. That's not really our problem. And I would say there is a more recent trend in seeing companies going, well, I don't think that's really the best way to approach that, because
Yeah.
if we do this well, we're actually getting more out of the employee in all these ways. But there is that shift that you have to make. No, go for it.
Definitely, there needs to be this shift, and I think a very common question we have is, well, what's the ROI? Like, what is the return of investment that we're getting out of this, right? And this is something that we've documented ourselves extensively. We've looked at research that, how do we get to this magic number? Because if we were able to give you this magic number, it'd be, kind of super no-brainer for both the people that even believe, but they sometimes have higher ups and other stakeholders that they need to.
They're accountable to.
They're accountable to.
They're spending these dollars. What are you getting for it?
Exactly right. And the truth of the matter is, I think with any investment in overall learning and professional development in general, depending on the industry, it's going to vary vastly, right? And if we imagine two types of companies, whereas one can be kind of a construction company, right? So very kind of towards manual labor oriented organization, and you invest into training, and you invest into kind of better practices and sense of safety in the workplace, and you, after a year or two, you determine that the number of accidents in the workplace has been reduced. You can probably tie these two together relatively easily, right? Yep. Now, if you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where it's pure knowledge worker, right? And this guy is working at a company like Pixar, right? And they're in charge of, story flows or whatever. How do you tie the books that person's read and his overall life experiences to just building a better story for Pixar, or a better dialogue, or it's really hard to be able to tie ROI in these sorts of scenarios, because there's so many things that actually contribute to it, that to isolate it to just this one thing, again, the story of the silver bullet, is just unrealistic.
It's difficult. Yeah, it is difficult. I think the thing that does make it easier, and this is where, as learning leaders, it's important for us to get outside of the learning box, because to your point, it's a challenge that I've seen organizations struggle with over time. And again, if you're doing an upskilling thing, even with a knowledge worker, it's easier to quantify, because you can say, well, this is what they were doing before, this is the behavior we're seeing now, and that's what we're trying to do. So it justified the expense. This employee well-being and health type stuff is a little bit harder, but I do think there's two ways that I've approached it that have been really successful. So people who might be like, well, how do we justify this expense? There are metrics that organizations are tracking, like retention, like employee satisfaction, like employee well-being, and those are only growing with the previous years, and recognizing that, hey, this actually has value to our bottom line. We can actually even tie this to earnings per share, things like that. So I think that conversation is getting a little bit easier, but you have to step outside of the learning world, because if you're
Yep.
just saying, well, completions and all of this, and they liked it, well, you're not necessarily going to have the data that you need. But if you can tap into this broader space, you can. But I think the other thing that has been really helpful is if you flip the script a bit and say, well, how much are we spending now that we have no visibility into? Suddenly
Yep.
now that number adds up pretty quick, because you can say, well, we're spending on average this much per employee, or we've invested this much. Well, what are we getting out of that?
Yep.
There are probably a lot of them where that would be met with a blank stare, not to mention the fact that there's a lot of inconsistency. Because I think the way a lot of organizations would handle what we're talking about today is, well, they would say, well, let's leave that to the managers. The people can go out and they can put that on their personal P card and they can expense it. That's historically how this has been delegated. The problem with that is, though, there's no consistency. You have no idea if managers are actually doing that, if people are engaging with that, things like that. And now you really have no visibility at all into what is the spend. We have no idea, because now some managers might be going way over what our budget is. Other managers might not be doing anything. And what this allows you to do is have a consistent way to say, hey, don't do this at your manager level. Do this through this channel, so we have visibility, we have the data, we can control spend, while still empowering them to say, do what's best for you.
Yeah, and also it does keep managers engaged. Like, you are involving the managers in the process, and I think that's actually a great point, because we actually have this case of a company out of Australia, and they spent, I think it was something like $6 million last year. This is a large insurance company, and they didn't know exactly where that had been spent, other than it was expense, and in their SAP it was tagged as learning. But there was absolutely no additional. Idea. So should they have spent maybe twice as much and get better results? Should they have spent half as much? But they just don't know.
They don't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's a great point.
That data and this is where, and I've done this for a couple different organizations, where that's where we got the start on this conversation. Was we actually worked with procurement to say, can we run the numbers? Can we see if we pulled out of our database how much was spent? Because a lot of times we're only looking at our L&D budget and we go,
correct,
well, we don't spend that much, and if we were doing this, it's like, well, but you're not looking at the whole picture. Because if you go to procurement and say, can you pull all approved expenses for anything related to professional development or learning, and then you look at that number, your eyes might just pop out of you might be like, wait, we're doing what? But we have no insight into it, none whatsoever. And I think sometimes that's just taken as, well, that's the cost of doing business. But what you're talking about is, it doesn't have to be that way. There's a better way to do it and be more efficient without losing the effectiveness. In fact, I think you can get greater effectiveness out of this because of what you can do with it.
100%. And there's these additional benefits of having that transparency, not only for yourselves in terms of understanding what's going on, but equally towards colleagues. Like, one of our key insights, having run Sunlight over the years, is we've identified that about 15% of employees in each organization are natural learners. So regardless of Sunlight, a budget, anything, like, it's completely irrelevant. These guys have this growth mindset and will always be engaging in some form of learning content in a very active way. Right. So they'll be reading a book. They'll be engaged in some form of online course. They'll be attending a workshop at least once a month. So this is just how they're wired. Now, the question that we all ask ourselves is, well, how do we get everyone to be as engaged in learning and be as proactive and constantly, like, learning new stuff? Now, we've learned that if you actually expose the rest of the organization to that fact, to the fact that there are people all around them that are constantly learning, we can actually make about 65% of the organization into these not fully natural learners, but almost. So instead of engaging once a month, it will engage every 2 months, right? Because you can imagine these people that are reading these books, they just don't walk into the office and then just gloat like, oh, look how smart I am. This is the book that I'm reading, right?
Hopefully they don't.
look at me. I'm sure they don't have many friends if they do, right?
Right.
But if you just create this, through the platform, people are naturally engaging in things, and like any Facebook feed or Instagram, like you're already accustomed to saying, oh, so Christopher is learning about this, and Jackie is learning about Y. So, or reading this book, and so many of these things you might be interested in, others you might not be, but others might just be interesting conversation if you're in the office, you have some coffee. It's like, oh, I saw that you were attending this conference. How did it go? So just that visibility of people engaging that for a fact. Like for example, yourself, Chris, you're a father of five, if almost six now, from what I understand. So if I know that you are reading a book, and that the next month you're reading another book, and you're a father of five, and I'm not doing anything about my professional development, I'm like, how is this guy has 5 kids, right? There's all these things, and still manages to invest time into himself and to becoming a better professional. Like, what is my excuse, right? Like, I'm partying every weekend or something. Like, you start questioning these things, and at the end of the day, I think every person, unless you're a psychopath, wants to be better, right? Like it's
Psychopath, right? That's the category of that we just, we're never going to move them over to this side of the fence. We'll just kind of,
not
but
not our market.
Point. Well, and this gets back to some of these terms that get thrown around in the industry a lot of, we want to build a learning culture. It gets thrown around a lot, but a lot of times I don't think people really know what to do with it actionably to say, well, how do we actually do that? And what you're talking about is an important piece where you can grow that percentage of people who, because they're, like you said, there's always those people that you don't have to tell them, you don't have to encourage them, you don't have to go out and find things. They're just going to do it. They're just going to do it, and they don't really care whether you see it, whether they're rewarded for it or not. It's just happening. But the goal is to grow that piece of the pie
Yep.
from this smaller percentage, and if you can increase that. So I think what you're talking about is a good way to do that in a positive way versus punitive, versus where we're going to punish you if you're not in this category, or we're going to punish you if you're not developing. Well, no, that'll get you compliance. That'll get you
100%.
compliance, and compliance is not what you want. You don't want people just doing it because, well, if I don't, I'm not going to get a 5 on my performance review, or my bonus is going to be lower. Well, that's not, then you're just going to find people who skip steps.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to give also the right tools for these managers to have good conversations with their direct reports. Like, you can imagine a manager that has this visibility and understands that potentially, yourself, Chris, you haven't done anything for your professional development in the past 3 months. Like, why is this? Like, there is this budget, right? You can use it for your whatever it is that you want to use it, right? Ideally, something work related, and you haven't, right? Isn't that curious? Like, why aren't you curious about anything at all that you don't want to be better at? It's like there. So it might start a conversation around, maybe there's some home issues, maybe you're not engaged at work, maybe you actually are applying for a new job. Like, there's so many things that can tell, or you completely forgot that budget was there.
Oh, which I just forgot about it. Right.
Like,
I've been putting that on my personal card. I didn't even think about it, type of a thing.
Exactly, but it at least gives you that point of conversation. That as you well mentioned, it's not punitive. It's, hey, we want you to be a better person. We want you to be a better professional. What's going on? There's anything I can help with. Is it a motivational issue? Is it something that you don't know in which direction to go? Because I personally find it, at the very minimum, interesting if any of our employees doesn't want to be better in a 3 or 6 months period. It's like, there's something weird here, right? Or because also that's not the type of employee that we want to have in our organization. Like, there's just a culture mismatch there if you're not that kind of individual that wants to strive for improvement.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is there's a misperception sometimes that these two things are mutually exclusive. And what I mean by that is that, well, either we have to focus on the business and the benefits to the organization and the employer, or we have to focus on the benefits and the things to the employee. And to me, I would say those aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, you both benefit when you do this right. The idea of, well, investing in your employees, investing in things like this, all the things we've been talking about, this comes back and it benefits the organization. It's not just wasted money like sometimes it's perceived. And I would say, somebody made a comment that in capitalist countries, a lot of times that is where that comes in, where it's like, well, that's not a good use of our money. It's like, well, actually it is, because companies run on people, and happy, engaged people perform exponentially better than people who are miserable and are just showing up to check a box. One of the things that was interesting that actually leads me to another little pathway is Deborah brought up the fact that in France, this is a requirement already. So in France, companies are required to allocate a certain amount of money to employees for their own development. And she talked about the fact that, she shared that the ROI piece, the happier workforce, all this stuff, they really have not seen any negatives in this. So to people who may be fighting against this, going, I just don't think this can work, there are cases where you can see this is already happening. And I've actually known some companies that are more progressive in their thinking around this, that are doing this well. My question to you is this, and this may tie back to how Sunlight's helping with this, is that this can be challenging in the sense that sometimes people might not know what to do with this. So I've seen and been involved in organizations where they've gone on a bit of a bender with this, and they've just said, all right, we're just going to tell everybody that you can spend up to this amount on whatever you want to do. And it actually leads to people almost having a bit of analysis paralysis, because they feel like, what do I pick? What's even out there? How do I find something? And now they almost don't know what to do because it feels too overwhelming. They've just been handed a blank canvas. Some people are fine. That 30% or 20% that just goes, yep, I already know, great, now the company's paying for it, I'm fine with it. They're fine. It's the rest of the population that goes, do I buy a book? What book do I buy? Do I take a course? Do I sign up for a community? Like, well, I'm not really sure where to go with this. How have you seen organizations tackle that one? And I think it's some of what you're doing with Sunlight to help not restrict what people can do, but give some sort of guidance so that they don't feel like, I just don't even know where to start.
Sure. I guess we take kind of like a Spotify approach, right? And if you look actually at our user interface, it really is. We took a lot of inspiration from Spotify. Let's just say that. And the reason for that is we see it kind of like what happens with music and music genres, right? Like there's a way to organize content. There's people that you potentially trust more in terms of what is good and what is not. So ideally, you could jump into Christopher's playlist on learning and have a few podcasts or videos or books that you might recommend. But maybe there's another expert on, I don't know, marine biology. And, that's the guy that posts all the interesting things on dolphins that you're interested in. And, it's already been curated, right? Because I think in every industry, there's people like yourself that are thought leaders, right? And that people look up to. And we've managed to gather quite a few of these to kind of curate these initial playlists. But the ultimate goal for us is to actually have leaders within the organization also start to build things, right? So how about we take those 15% of people that, they're already learning stuff, they're already picking things up, but building these playlists that you can check out and just have a browsing experience that might lead you to choose that first piece of item or that second piece of item, that piece of content that you're looking for. Ultimately, definitely the what is it called? The paradox of choice, is it?
Yes.
It's a choice. So there's so many things to choose. I don't know what to choose.
I just don't know what to do, so I don't choose anything.
I don't choose anything, right? So it's kind of like Netflix. You're just there, actually clicking through for 15, 20 minutes, you actually haven't started to view anything.
And then
You're
you
just
turn
watching.
the TV off because you're like, I just am not even sure.
Exactly. So we help by using these thought leaders to be curators, both external world thought leaders, but equal internal thought leaders. And kind of our roadmap is to be able to actually start integrating thought leaders with different organizations. So we're starting to ask actually our clients, like we have amazing clients, we have very high level individuals, like, hey, can we actually have your playlist and publish it so that all of our users can actually now have access to it.
From other customers and say,
exactly.
hey, these other thought leaders from these other companies are doing this, which gets to another piece of helping companies think outside their own silo of what are we doing.
Exactly right, because at the end of the day, all of the resources that are on Sunlight are publicly available. So they all have some form of URL. You can access them. Maybe it's a workshop, so there's a link to the workshop, or it's an event, or it's a book, or it's whatever it is. It's publicly accessible. This is not internal company knowledge that is being exposed to Sunlight. So it's just a matter of how do we enable these really amazing individuals to create these playlists, and then ideally get sign up from these amazing individuals to then say, hey, yeah, I am the CTO of this amazing company. Why not just publish my list there? And there's a little bit of ego there and clout that you earn. Why not?
Okay. So two follow-up questions that I have as I think about this. One is just very tactical, and then the next one came from Sarika, so I'll bring that one up in a minute here. But when it comes to process, just so that people who may be watching or listening are thinking about this in terms of how does this work? Because, let's just talk workflow standpoint. So you've got this curated list of things that people can choose from. And again, there's a fair amount of tailoring that's going on already. But what happens when somebody says, hey, here's something that I think is really interesting that maybe isn't here. This is a piece of development I'd like to do that isn't in any of the playlists now. How does that work going back to this so that they don't just end up using their corporate card and then expensing it and now it's gone off in the ether?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, from a tactical perspective, it's quite simple. You can request anything as long as you can share a URL. So if you can't already find it on Sunlight, you can say, I want to access this thing or purchase this thing and share a URL. And what we're able to do is go and crawl that site, bring as much information as we can from it. And then you'll just go through the purchase process. You'll get a digital prepaid MasterCard, which you can use to purchase. So you don't have to pay for it yourself. You don't have to expense it later. It's fully accessible. And that's also something interesting. It's kind of from the tactical point of view, some companies approach this and say, hey, Juan, we have a budget in place, right? We're giving people $1,000 a year and they're not using it, right? And, so we've tried your method and it actually doesn't work, right? It's so we try to double click, right? We say, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Like, how are you actually giving these employees ownership and how are you giving this budget? And they say, well, at the very first day that they onboard, they're told in the employee manual that there's $1,000, and then as soon as they send an email to their manager and they forward the approval over to finance, all they have to do is pay for it, put the invoice back to finance, and within 45 to 60 days, they'll get reimbursed. So it's super simple.
Super simple.
And I'm like, okay, that's great. I mean, amazing that you have that budget in place. But what we've learned is you will never jump through those hoops unless it's a significant amount. So these are people that are earning $50,000, $80,000 a year that you're asking them to do that for a $20 book. They'll never do that.
Like, do it. They're not going to do it. No.
Ever. So and then it's kind of, well, what happens then? Either A, they buy themselves, which, okay, great. They're at least investing into themselves. But as an organization, you have no visibility about what they're interested in, right? Completely. So the second thing is they're cheap, actually, and they don't want to buy it. So, one of your employees just decided not to buy something that will improve themselves because they didn't want to use their own money, and you have a budget in place to do this, but it's just the process that has too much friction. So what we try to do is remove all that friction to say, Just share the link. Here's the credit card, make the purchase, and you're done. And I think you had a second question, Chris, that I can't remember.
I didn't ask it yet because I wanted to talk through this, because that was one of the things when I got to know what you were doing that really, what to me was a huge thing, because like you said, I've been in those conversations where people go, this just doesn't work. People don't do it. And when you actually look at the process, you go, well, I wouldn't do it. I'm not going to go through that headache and nightmare to try and get reimbursed for something, and what if it's a subscription model? You seriously think every month I'm going to try and do this and I'm going to no, I'm not.
There's actually a number, like we've done surveys and stuff, and so the number is about $250. So anything below $250, people will not go through it. So if it's like a conference, like 500, 600, 800, 1,000,
then they'll do it. Fine.
Then they'll do it.
It's a decent chunk of money.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I think that's, what we're talking about is it's about removing the friction of this, which gets to the question that I said I was going to get to, which, from Sarika, is around the scale and complexity for a large organization. So, I'm sure for maybe a small organization, it can seem pretty straightforward. Well, we have this budget, there's 50 people in our company, and we're just going to do this, and it makes sense. As you start to get into these bigger organizations, have you seen challenges with that scaling, or because of, to me personally, I can see some of the pre-work being important because there's a fair amount of messaging and things that you have to get into place, but the user experience, it's pretty slick. It's pretty slick. And the visibility that you get into these things, to your point of, if somebody wants something and it's not there, they send a link and then they get a MasterCard that they can just pop into the thing to pay for it. And now you know what they spent the money on and what they're doing, and you have more detail than just a category in SAP that says learning. Like, well, I don't know what that $30 or $40 went to. I have no idea.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, in terms of the scale, I think like any organization, the larger it is, actually, it becomes a bit more unique. Like you start having very custom solutions for that they build maybe in-house. Maybe they're integrating into Workday, but not a standard integration. No, this is a special Workday integration. So you do run into these complexities as any large organization, I think you would imagine. But our experience so far is, in order to release something like this, I think the pre-work is definitely key, like you mentioned. It's you never, and this is not just something I think as a general good practice, you will never do a full rollout of any platform into the entire organization in like one day. You'll pick a specific department or a piece, a relevant piece of the business, and say, okay, this is where we're going to start, and then we're going to do kind of the full rollout, right? Like make sure all systems are green, everything's integrated into the right place. And then you do like the full rollout. But in terms of benefits, I would actually say that bigger organizations have the biggest benefit because of what you just mentioned. Because of scale, you actually start getting the benefit of big data, right? You have just a ton of data.
Data and the spend. I mean, to me, I just look at it and go, for big organizations, you're talking 7-8 figures that may be going out the door completely invisible. You have no idea what it's going to. You have no idea where it's going, and that money's being spent for, we talk about ROI and you go, I have no idea what that is. So I can see, to me, when I look at it from a complexity standpoint, to what I said earlier, it's kind of that initial phase of how are we going to figure this out? Because this money is split across all these different budgets. There's some work to do in the organization to say, okay, if we're going to pull this out of managers, right, how do we fund it? Because I guarantee a learning and development organization at first glance is going to go, we can't commit all our dollars to this. Like, we're not going to be able to do any of our other things. So you're going to have to work with the business to figure out where that pool is coming from so that you can do it. But once you're through that, to me, the other one you hit on is the integration piece. This data, it's great, but how are you making sure that you're getting that back into your BI tools or things like that, so that you can actually see it and integrate it into the other places, so it's telling the story you need it to tell? Because it's a compelling story. Honestly, it's a compelling story, and I think organizations that may not quite be there yet, it's like, try it. I don't think I've ever worked with an organization that said, we're going to commit to letting people invest in themselves. I don't think I've ever seen them, when they do it right, come back and go, that was a waste. That was a, that was
I
a
agree.
colossal failure. People are leaving. They're miserable. They're not
Never.
happy. And what a waste of money. I've never seen it in my entire career.
Never, never. And there's also a lot of the concerns that we sometimes get is, what if we turn it on and everyone spends the entire budget on the first week? It's like that's actually never, finance is going to kill me. Like, this is the budget for the year, right? Like and then honestly, it's never happened. I'd be quite impressive if it ever did. But people do understand that when you give them that ownership, it kind of becomes like a little bit of their salary, right? So they actually take care of it. It's like there's this little thing that's theirs, and they're gonna make sure that they spend it well. And the other thing is, from an operational standpoint, you don't have to commit your entire budget day one. So all the budgets that you define in Sunlight are virtual. So, you can give everyone their budget, but maybe have actually just committed, a very small fraction of that as actual funds that are kind of held in the bank to make for these payments. And then as you're seeing people engage and actually use it, you can actually continue topping up so that the system keeps on running.
It's not like we've got to do one mass lump sum payment.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, what happens? Which
Exactly.
It's a great point for people who may be thinking about this more from a financial standpoint of how do we manage this? Well, it's actually pretty easy to manage. You budget
it's very
that kind of thing. But to your point of, what if everybody goes out and starts developing on day one? In my opinion, that's a good problem. Like, if that ever does happen,
that'd be amazing.
As far as I'm concerned, that's a good problem to have. Organizations are crying out, going, how do we create a culture of development? How do we get people to be learning and doing these things? It's like, would you really be that upset if you open the floodgates and people went, I'm in? But to your point, one of the things that I think is really unique about it is the fact that you hit on this briefly, which is you're empowering your learner. You're kind of giving them this gift of saying, hey, here's this money that's yours to spend how you see fit. I think there's always this fear that people will be reckless and,
exactly.
What if they just go, and it's like, that's
the opposite.
Actually not, it's the opposite. People are very protective, and this is mine. This is something I want to invest, things like that. So I think that mindset shift of, well, what if it goes wrong? Well, what if it goes right?
And people understand that, even though it's theirs, they're still accountable for it. It's still something that their manager is going to have visibility on. So, you also don't want to be the person that invests into something really, really weird. And I remember this, I can't remember what was the name of the book, but we were very early on, and one of our investors, they were using Sunlight, right? And one of them bought a book, and apparently it's like a very famous book, but the title of it was like, what to do if you're on your deathbed, or like it was like a very glum.
It was a very morbid title.
And it was like, what's going on? I immediately called him like, hey, Alexis, are you okay? I just got, I was looking at the data, and I just got this book, and then now he's explained everything. It's apparently a very famous. I'll have to find the title, but it was a funny story of getting that insight that you would get from your direct reports of what they're up to.
And what you just said there, I think, is another problem we're trying to tackle so often is, how do we get managers to engage in conversation with their employees? Because we know how critical that is to the success of a team. People want to feel like their company's investing, their manager's invested. And a lot of times they just don't know. And this is an opportunity. Grant, is it a silver bullet? No. Is magically having this going to create all those conversations? No. But it does create a conversation point where that conversation could have gone very differently. That may have been, I've been thinking about this, or that may have really opened a dialogue that needed to happen that you would have had no visibility into had that data not been there. So, I told you we were going to run out of time. I'm just getting started. I feel like I'm just getting warmed up, but it's fine. It's fine. We'll have to schedule a follow-up or something like that. But this has been absolutely fantastic, Juan. I really appreciate the time today. everybody watching, hopefully this is giving you a completely different perspective a little bit on how you might be able to think differently about it. Not replacing what you're doing, but augmenting something that's already happening in your organization, but is happening ineffectively and inefficiently, that actually can drive some of the outcomes that so many of us are trying to drive towards. So thank you for being here, Juan. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you,
Have a
Christopher.
wonderful rest of your Friday and a great weekend.